So this will be the last year before Pesach. We'll try to finish as much as we can in the sugya of the way the time is divided, the years, and we'll see how that applies to lots of different areas of our lives. Remember, we are up to page Kuf Nun Hey. So we talked about, again, we started this year on Daf, which started at page Kuf Nun Gimel, and we said that the things that everything's are divided into three sets of twos, right? 2,000 years of Tohu, 2,000 years of Torah, and 2,000 years of Mashiach. And as we pointed out that in the previous year, that this, right, everything has a beginning, a completion, and a tachlis. That's right, the Hatchala, Shlama, v'tachlis. And that's what we learned at the beginning of that. So, and what Moshe is going to tell us, or he told us already, that the three chalakim, Hatchala, Shlama, Tachlit, correspond to the three divisions of the six, right? Which corresponds to the 2,000 years of Tohu, 2,000 years of Torah, and 2,000 years of Mashiach. And now we'll see how that this chalukah applies to very many areas of history and of our lives. So let's start again. So let's start at the top of page Kuf Nun Hey. Gimel Chelke Hazman Ba'adam Ba'olam B'Yisrael. So these three chalakim, these three parts of Zman, right, as they apply to people, to individuals, to the world, and to Klal Yisrael. Let's say, V'hinei, Haseder Hazeh Shel Gimel Zmanim, She'em Hatchala V'Shlama V'Achzara L'Shoresh. So he says it's the beginning, it's the Hashlama, that's when the life reaches its peak, and the return to its source, return to the roots, where everything comes back to where it started from. So Kayam B'chol Chelkei Adam. This applies to Chelkei Olam. It applies to every area of life. Ha'adam, for instance, Ad Ben Esrim U'Bechinat Shnei Alafim Tohu. They look at a person, right? For the first 20 years of his life, this is like 2,000 years of Tohu. Because he's in a state of flux, he's a state of coming into existence. He doesn't yet have a completed surah. Ve'az hu matchil hitavot. Okay, and then in those years he starts to come into being. Aval ein lo adayin surah shlema. He doesn't have a complete surah. I think he means in the first 20 years. Achar kach adam mekabel et surato ha'ishit ba'omdo al dato v'zeh shlemut shelo. Then a person, right, in his middle age, right, because when he becomes already a mature adult, so that he becomes a tzurato ishit. So then you can see, when you see a person who's over the age of 20, you can see what kind of a personality is, what kind of a person, what are his traits, where he's going, where he's headed, who he is. Right? And in the days of old age, he goes back, right? And it returns to what he started out being. Okay, so we have the three phases of life. We have youth, maturity, and old age. Okay. And that's the way things are. Okay. Gimel Zmanim Yisrael. Gam kachu gam etzel Klal Yisrael b'machzor hashana. You take the yearly cycle. B'chag ha'aviv Klal Yisrael notzar. And Pesach, right, Klal Yisrael is created. V'yotzei miMitzrayim. B'chag ha'katzir, the chag of the cutting of the harvest. Klal Yisrael magia l'shleimuto b'kalat Torah. We reach shleimus. We reach the Torah. Ubizman shel v'chag ha'asif v'tzeit hashana. And on Sukkot, at the end of the year, Klal Yisrael chozrim l'nekudat ha'motza b'hekef ananei hakavod. We come back, and now we're completely surrounded by the ananei hakavod, meaning we come back home, but we come back home after having the accomplishments of the year, as we spoke about. We'll see. We'll explain that in the next page as well. That we have the accomplishments of the year. We didn't go through the year and end the year and the cycle where we were. That would be a total loss. That would be a total waste of the human potential. But what we do is that we come back to come back home to celebrate. We come back home to celebrate. We have gone into the world. We've done our shlichus, and now we've completed our shlichus for the year. We've reached the point where we can reap the benefits of our glory and of our mitzvahs, of our Torah, and come back to our where we're supposed to be, what the tachlis of it all was. V'zeu hasod, שבחג הסוכות אנו כל כך עסוקים בהקפות סביב המזבח. This is why that's why at Sukkot we're walking around the mizbech, as the Mishnah tells us. Right? They had their kafot with aravot around the mizbech. Right? It's one, and we have Shana Rabbah where we do it 7 times. We have hakafot again. Why? Kivan she'inyano shel Chag HaSukkot. So you think that it's not because it's the best way to dance is because in a circle. No, that's not. That's right. The circle is the result, not the cause. Kivan she'inyano shel Chag HaSukkot achrei hashlamat hakev zman shalem. Sukkot means that we've gone through a whole cycle, a hakev. We've gone from one end and come back full circle to the beginning. Azovrim lemakom acher lenukodash hashorish. So we come to a starting point. Right? And we're at a root point again from which to start over again, right? And to start over again and face new challenges and face new opportunities for growth, because we've gone through a cycle and we've come back to the thing to where we started. What does it mean to go out of your dirat keva? It means leave your normal way of life and enter into a different space, into a different halal legamre. That's what. For those who joined late, we're on page Kuf Nun Hey. Okay. So right, to be in a different area. In other words, we go around. Right? In other words, we go through a cycle. Right? We have the beginning, we have the middle, and the end, and when we're completed, so then we're home. But home, right? Where to rest, just to reap the benefits of our efforts. Just like we said, also the Moshe doesn't mention it, but the Sfarim it says that Pesach is compared to Erusin, right? And I mentioned the last week, and Shavuos is compared to Nisuin, and Sukkot is the Cheder Yichud. Right? That's the tachlis of it all. That's where you want to get to have this close and intimate relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? So we have to go through different stages. Right? First, we have to go through the Erusin, through the initial stages, stages of the relationship, and then we move on and on and on until we get to the completion. But once we get to the completion, as we'll see, that we have to start over again because we want to have a new Erusin and we want to have a new Nisuin and a new Cheder Yichud, because those are going to be much more elevated than this year's. Ubemakibil, Hamachzor Hashnati Shel HaMoadim, Hamavusas Al Seder Yetziat Klal Yisrael, this Seder of the holidays, which has to do with the formation of Klal Yisrael, as we just described in the previous paragraph, Mishulav, it's intertwined, it's b'machzor hachayim hashnati shel olam. This is the way the world goes in a yearly cycle. B'choref adam zoreat hasadeh v'yored geshem. In the winter, person plants and rain comes. B'aviv, in the spring, hatvua yotzeit la'avir olam matchila ligdol. The tvua comes out and begins to grow. V'hi olechet v'gdela ad she'atvua omedet b'komata. And let's say wheat continues growing until it's standing b'komata, and its full height and its full stature. V'zeh b'zman k'tzir chitim she'ikar ma'achal adam. The ikar of the agricultural season is when you are harvesting the wheat, right? Meaning that it's complete, right? But you haven't yet brought it home yet. Umeaz hi holechet v'kaleh. Interest kala. It becomes weaker. Again, it starts going downhill. Right? It's from, in other words, what Moshe is describing is the peak is Shavuos in terms of the mitzias of in the world. When you walk out into the fields, Shavuos time, and you see all the fields, the glorious fields, and their wheat and their and that's the and that's the glory of the physical world. And then you cut it down, and the world starts going downhill, right? Because it's no longer in its full glory. Right? The wheat has been cut, and then it dries out, and then finally you bring it home. Right? You bring it home, and that's when you really enjoy it. But that's in terms of our ability to enjoy it. But in terms of the way the world looks, the way the world works, the world is at its full power, right? And Shavuos Tam Chag Katzir. Similar, as we said before, a person is in his full power when he's reached that level of maturity, when he's middle aged, when he has all of his faculties with him, all his physical abilities are with him, and his mental abilities are with him, and he's standing in his full glory as this is what a human being is. It can be, right? Okay, when in its full stature, and then he begins to decline. Right? Then at a certain point, which we call the beginning of old age. So then he declines. He's not as strong as he was. He's not as able to do things as he was. He's not able to, perhaps even his cognitive abilities are declining in a certain sense. So that's the decline, right? But at the end of the day, as we will see, right, that decline is going to lead to a new regrowth, a new rebirth. Umeaz, so he says here, umeaz, he holechet v'kala, v'chala, the grain like goes and v'chala from the word v'chulu, it comes to an end, right? Umityabeshet, and it gets dry. Ad sheba hazman lesof atfuah v'lachnis lebeit adam, until the time comes when you bring it into the house. So again, you can't eat the grain. You can't have the full benefit of the grain before it dries out. And if you take wet grain and you grind, if you get wet wheat and you grind it, so you're going to have a very inferior flour to bake bread, right? It's not going to be very good if the flour is all damp and wet. You want the dry flour as dry as could be, right? And that's when you could really enjoy it, right? But at the end of the day, it's dry, right? It's lost its vitality in terms of the growth process. It's complete. Its growth has completely come to an end. It's come to the end of its cycle. And now so again, and the next section will help explain how everything fits together. Na'ut sofo b'tchilato mizrial izrial. What does it mean? That the beginning and the end is from one planting into the other planting. Okay. Malacha gimel zmanim Israel. In other words, it goes from one planting to another planting, meaning the point, let's read it inside. Vasederhu, what is the Seder? Sheka'asher adavar ne'esaf v'chozer l'shoresh. When the thing is gathered together and it returns to its roots where it was, right? In other words, it's harvested. It's back home, right? Right? Because how do you plant? You take seeds out of your house and you put them in the ground, right? So now, after you've harvested your wheat and you brought it home, so those same wheat seeds, which are now fully grained, which are to be used for food, right? They come back to where they were, but it says it's nechlak l'shnayim. It's divided into two parts. Chelek echad chozer l'shoresh. One part, right, comes back to its roots, meaning it's going to be used, right, because that's its purpose, right? You're going to eat it, right? So it comes back to you took it out of your house because you anticipated saying, okay, I'm taking the wheat seeds out of my house in order to be able to have wheat plants and have bread next year. That's what you did Sukkot's time when you planted the wheat. So it came back to the shoresh, but it came back to the shoresh as full-grown wheat, and now it's capable of sustaining you, giving you the sustenance. But v'hasheni, but there's a second part. Your wheat harvest, there's a second thing you do with it. Nizra shuv. you're going to take a certain percentage of your wheat, right, and not grind it into flour and make bread out of it. You're going to take it and replant it, right, because you got to. Where's your next year's crop going to come from? In order to, right, to grow from it a new version or a new round. So kach ze b'tvuah shenesefet habayta. Turn the page. This is the tvuah which is gathered. Shebo ha'ikar nechal yedei adam. Most of it, if we plant, I don't know what the percentage is, but most of it, right, is going to be eaten, right? And right, v'etashar. But what's left over, right, there's a certain amount that you leave over. Zorim l'machzor haba v'chozer chalila, and it goes. That's the cycle. So the cycle is that after every cycle, right, you have, right, gained a tremendous amount, because this is why you planted in the first place, so you could have what to eat, right? You have a lot of bread. But on the other hand, you always have to worry about and think about, well, there's going to have to be a new cycle. There's to be a new cycle. It means you have to start over again and take wheat seeds and start again and plant again. So that's the point of the point is that every time we go through a cycle, right? And so let's read the next line. Then explains how this applies to the Tzurat Adam. V'kach gam b'Tzurat Adam, and this is the way it is with the way the people are, right? With the way our growth process. B'tchila ha'adam nizra. Okay? At the beginning of our lives, we are planted, right? We're conceived by our parents, right? So that's the word zera, right? The word, right? V'achar kach hu yotzei lepoel, and then he comes into existence. Until he reaches his peak. And then after his peak, he starts declining. Right? Until he reaches the point where you have to replant him. That's what death is. Right? When we think about it, right, when a person goes through life, right, so he goes through life, he's born, right, he reaches his peak, his maturity, his full strength, and then he declines until the point where he is so declined that he dies and has to be buried in the ground, right? And what happens? So it's exactly the same process. So most of him gets his reward. Shebemita, with his death, kol chelkei neshama mistalkim lamala, right? All of the different parts of his soul, right, go up, right, to lamala, le'anot miziv hashchina, and they have connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They have hanov from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's glory. Okay, so that's like the sukkahs where that's the grain that you've harvested. That's your harvest. That's what you eat, right? That's your schar, which your ochel, right? That's what you eat, right? But that's not the end of the process, because there's another cycle. Because everybody lives through one cycle of life in this world, at least one cycle, maybe more, but lives through a life of a cycle in this world. But he gets buried. Ve'al yedei hakvura, and through burial, haguf nizrach mechadash ba'adama. This is a new planting in the ground. Ad sheyotzei tzurat adam chadasha, until you come out again in Tchias HaMesim. Right? That's the idea. Moshe, again, we learned it in Rei Amuna, right, in the section of Tchias HaMesim, where Moshe speaks about this at length, right? He speaks about how the whole point of it can't be that man was created just to come to an end. Baruch Hu doesn't create things to die. Baruch Hu creates only life. Right? So the reason that we die is because it's a step towards a higher form of life. Right? We live in this world, we experience this world, we do the Torah and mitzvahs that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us in this world, right? But the point of it is, okay, but we're going to, as we're describing here, we're going to go through a cycle of birth and maturity and death, and then, right, we're going to be replanted in the ground. Right? And so it's just like we plant the wheat seeds on sukkahs, right, for next year's crop. So also, when a person is buried, he's going to be, right, he's planted for the next round of life, which is the Tchias HaMesim. Again, we have to understand that we're learning Perek Chelek right? And we're learning the parts of Perek Chelik of Mashiach. However, Perek Chelik doesn't start with Mashiach, right? And when Moshe gave Shiurim, not only this is just a a section of Rav Moshe's Shurim on the Perek. Rav Moshe gave Shurim on the whole Perek, right? The editors decided that Mashiach was the one that would be the most interest, most relevant to our lives. So they published this set of Shurim, which still takes up some 400, 500 pages, right? But Rav Moshe gave Shurim on the earlier part of Perek Chelik, which talked about Tchias HaMesim. So that's what he says. And whether we spoke about the El, but Sugya Tchias HaMesim, when we talk about Tchias HaMesim, it's Ba'er, Ba'arichut, Inyam V'yatzitzu Me'ir Ke'esa Ba'aretz. That they will sprout up in the city like the grass of the ground. Okay, which we're not going to go into now, right? Shekol Tzurata Odam Shel Ha'olam Hazeh, right? The idea is that when God created man in this world, Hirak B'Bechinat Tipaz Zarit. It's a drop of zera. Klapei Hatzurat Adam Shetetzei B'Tchiat HaMeitim. If you want to think about what is your life is just like you think about, right, that drop of zera, the drop of sperm that created you, and you want to compare yourself to that zera, that tipat zera. So just think about that your future life is going to have that same kind of relationship to your present life. That your present life is going to be, right? We think we're living a good life now, Baruch Hashem. We have Torah, we have mitzvahs, we have a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'chule, and we try our best, right? But we should understand that it's right, mamish, like nothing compared to that life that we will be zocha to with Tchias HaMesim, where it'll be a completely more elevated form of life than the one that we have now. Yeah, Jerry, yeah.
So when we use the metaphor of bringing the grain into your house,
Mm-hmm.
and the parallel to that is our soul or something goes up, and we reap benefits, and then a little
Mm-hmm.
bit gets planted, and then that becomes our Techiyat Metim.
Mm-hmm.
What? Body, person, soul. So our soul is separate up above, and then this part that gets planted gets reunited with the soul,
Yeah,
or
that's the way it looks. Is that it'll be reunited with the soul, right? The soul will
but
come
so
back.
what's the godless of it? I mean, is the godless of it the something about the body, or I mean, is it the soul and
So I don't know the answer to that question. That's the
Mhm.
question that
Mhm.
it
Well,
seems. Again, here. I'm speculating. If you're asking me for an answer based on sources, I don't know. But it seems, right, from what I understand, what I could understand, is that the soul will have, right, been exposed to the Ziva Shechina in some way, which will give it a tremendous, much greater uh, appreciation of the reality of the spiritual world of Kohen Baruch Hu. And the body will be purified. Right? That's the decay of the body is the idea that even the body will become purified and be reformed in a pure form. It'll be broken down and it'll start. So that shidduch between that soul and that body is going to be on a level which I can't describe. But that's what I understand is the process. Okay? So that's okay. But again, it's very interesting, very nice, and how to see how Moshe is tying these things together. That these three stages are constants in all of the cycles of life, right? Okay, and they're constants in we say the way the human beings develops, and then the way the holidays develop, the way the seasons develop, right? And uh, and the way the world develops, right? As Ramesh will describe it, right? That the 2,000 years of Tohu and the 2,000 years of Tohu is this initial step, and then there's 2,000 years of Torah, which is the peak, and then there's going to be a decline. And hopefully, we'll get to the end of the chapter where he'll discuss the decline, because remember that we're 2,000 years of Mashiach started right, in the year 240, right, which is 1,780 years ago, or something like that, right? 7,000, tough Shapell, right? Right. It's started a long time ago. So we'll have to see how that fits in with the system, right, with the pattern. But that's and as we discussed, and that also the Sheshis Mebereshis, right? Okay, we'll see. V'gam, okay, here he speaks about it again, right? V'gam ha'historia shel Klal Yisrael hukach. This is Jewish history. B'tchila ha'ita Yetzias Mitzrayim, shehi bechinat ha'leida shel Klal Yisrael. Okay, before we talked about Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot on a yearly cycle, but now he says let's take it on a grand historical cycle of how Klal Yisrael started and where we're going to wind up. Because he says, this was the birth. Before his Beposich, it's talking about the birth of Klal Yisrael on the day of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Then came the Shleimus. Right? This is Matan Torah, right? Having a Beis HaMikdash, having the Shechina with us. Umeaz, and from that time on, Hatalich Yitchil Laredet. Right? Things started to decline. Begalut achrei galut, ad she'yeh zriya mechadash latilovo. So Klal Yisrael is also going to, right? There is, when we say that Klal Yisrael, right, or the world, right, is headed to the 7th millennium of Churban, right, which means, it's what it really means, it's the 7th millennium is going to be a rebirth, it's going to be a Zriyam Chadash, because we're spending 2,000 years of Mashiach in decline, right? Whereas even until Mashiach comes, once Mashiach comes, so then the decline will be halted. But Lemaisa, that's 2,000 years of decline, starting from the year 240, as we said, because that's the beginning of the 5th millennium, right? So those are the 2,000 years of Mashiach. Starts in the year 240. The 6th millennium started in the year 1240. And now we're in the year 2026, which is 786 years later. Well, let's see. Okay, let me finish the chapter, the section here anyway. Well, if he's right, move on. Right, that's why it can be understood. She'af shavru rov ha'alpayim. Even though the great majority of the 2,000 years of Mashiach have already passed, and Mashiach hasn't yet come. Kol alpayim nikreim al shem Mashiach. They're all called years of Mashiach. Why? Kivan shemitchilat alpayim ha'olam holech v'chaser u'ma'abed et tzurato. The world, again, the best word I can think of is declining, in a state of decline, losing its form. Kedei lachzor lenekudat hamotza shelo al yedei Mashiach. Okay. In other words, we're moving, right? In other words, right, that things are, let's finish the paragraph because he asks Sakash and he gives the teretz. V'chein mita, and this is like death. Sherov chelkei adam istalkim. Because what is death, right? Death is a process, right? Most of a person, I mean, unless he's, some kind of an accident happens to him, right? But and in a normal process, right, a person loses his cells, he loses his body cells, just in a purely physical level, right? He loses much more cells than he's making in his body, right? V'haguf nizra, and then things, right, the chalkei adam mistalkim, v'haguf nizra, the body is replanted, v'nir kav, and deteriorates and is what's the word, decays, right? Kadesh lekabel tzura chadasha. That's the decay of the body, because the body is needs also has to be purified. V'chein evenu kama pamim v'divrei agra, right? He says, right, sheshnei alafim shlimot haMashiach nechshavim chazara letohu. It's going back to tohu. In other words, we have to think of this again as an arch or an arc, right? That goes right from the we go from the beginning and we go to the peak, and then right the 2,000 years of Mashiach are the decline, which is the return to Tohu. Mipnei she'ein bahem Torah. It's pretty surprising. And he says, and even though even though the Torah that we have, the Gemara that we learn, was all created in these 2,000 years, in the years of Mashiach, after the year 240. This is a very deep concept. We have to think about it and try to understand it. The world itself loses its surah Torah. The Torah made a certain imprint on the world, and that imprint, the world was transformed by the Torah, but la'at, the world loses its strength, its vitality of the koach of the Torah. So even though we have lots of Torah, but the way the world looks, and the way the world responds to that Torah is less and less. Right? The world is a less spiritual place, it's a less Torahic a place. As the decline goes on, we lose parts of it. Okay, and we have to get back to the kedei lachzor l'nekudat harishit shel yedei Mashiach v'lekabel tzurah chadash habetin. So Mashiach is going to come, and we're going to come back to the starting point, and then we're going to start over again. But again, starting over again, right, with a completely tzurah chadasha. Okay, so it's a very interesting thing. So we have to understand, maybe it's kashur to the concept of Yeridas Hadoros, right, that the generations are declining, meaning that it's not so much that we don't have Torah today. There's lots of Torah being learned, etc. But the world itself, right, is yored, right? And we just look outside, just read the newspaper, just see what the world looks like today, right? The world is much less affected, much less influenced by Torah than it was. Than it was even 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Okay? The world is a different Torah, right? And people who my Rabbeim who lived in the earlier part of the 20th century, in the 1900s. So I heard from them that they said that there was a tremendous decline in the world, following World War I, right? He said that the same shtetl, we have all these descriptions of what Elul looked like in the shtetlach, even the fish in the rivers, which would be shaking, right? So one of my Rabbeim said he remembers that when he was a kid, that's the way it was, right? But then, right, things changed, right? The world was not the same. The world, right, things changed. The whole atmosphere changed. The war changed things. Whatever the upheavals that happened, the world is completely has lost that tzura of what the world should look like. Right? And the same thing in our world. You see declines. You see declines. I see declines. Even in my time, I see declines in the way, I don't know, the seriousness that some people, again, the Torah that's learned in yeshivas, etc. I see declines. Anyway, that's 50 years ago, an Israeli yeshiva bocher went home, only once during a winter's month. Right? That was it. He went from home, Sukkot, and he came back Pesach, and maybe once in the middle he came to visit his parents. Once. And today, if the parents, if the guy isn't coming home for Shabbos, the parents got to go and bring him cookies and cake and candies to the yeshiva. I asked my kids, "Where are you going?" "Oh, we're going to Beit Shemesh. We're going to Bnei Brak. We're going here." "Why are you going?" "Oh, we got to visit our kids. Kids are homesick. Kids are homesick." I don't know. That's the way it is. But anyway, I'm just giving this, as an anecdotal thing about the way that the world is. It's a different world, right? And it's a yerida, right? The way it's not the same, right? With all the good things, it's not the same. And that's what Rav Moshe is saying, is that this decline is a decline not so much of the Torah, because lots of Torah was produced, but it's the decline of how the Torah is reflected onto the world. And that's the Shnei Alafim.
So is this designed by Is this decline by design or is it our fault?
It seems again, Ramosha said earlier. It's a very good question, Misha. Ramosha said earlier, and the last thing we learned last week. Let's just look at that again. But in the bottom of page Kuf Nun Dalid, right, Ramosha said that in the last paragraph there, I think it was the last thing we did, if I remember last week. He says in the bottom of Kuf Nun Dalid. The Mashiach could have come before that, right? Etc. Right? So he says, of course, there were times where Mashiach could have come, right? There were times. In other words, the world wasn't meshubad to this Seder Habriya, meaning there was the general picture was if things are going to play out, right, without some kind of a very dramatic event happening, which will bring the Mashiach at some earlier point, if we'll be without our being Zocha. This is how the trajectory was planned out, right? In other words, again, just like if Adam Rishon hadn't sinned, so there wouldn't be any death, right? Right. So this whole story about this whole story about decline and death, et cetera, that wouldn't have existed, right? So of course we're somewhat at fault, meaning, right? But I mean we are at fault because the sin brings about this death and decay and decline, right? However, right, there seems to have been a plan B, right? That okay, but so if things are going to play out in a natural kind of a way, right? So then this is what it's going to look like. This is the Seder HaOlam, this is the Seder HaBriya, right? These are the holidays, right? Et cetera, okay? So that's what he says. Okay, so let's move on. Okay. We'll see if I try to cover as much as we can today. Okay, Rosh Hashanah v'Sukkot na'utz v'sovazot. V'cheinu b'chol shana. This is the way it is in every year. Kamo she'seir olam hazman shel Sukkot mechalek et hatvuah l'shnayim. As we said, when Sukkot comes around, then everything is divided in two, right? Chelek nechal v'chelek nizra, a part that's eaten and a part that's planted. Kach gam b'kol ha'klal yisrael yishnei panim l'chag HaSukkot. So he says Sukkot has two different aspects. Okay, very interesting. When we get to Sukkot, it's very kedai to remember this, right? Mitzad echad hu siyam shel gimel regalim. Right. On one hand, right, Sukkot is the completion of the gimel regalim. B'bchinat hatvuah nechelet. Right. It's the tvuah which is going to be eaten. Umitzad sheni, but from another perspective, hu bak kehemshech letikun shel Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippur likrat hashana chadasha. B'bchinat tvuah nizrat. He says, because what is Rosh Hashanah and Kippur? Rosh Hashanah and Kippur is the tikkun of the world, which will allow us to continue into the next year. Because if we didn't have a Yom Adin, and if we didn't have a Yom of Slicha and Kapora, so then right, we wouldn't be able to survive from one year to the next, right? So really, Rosh Hashanah and Kippur is the planting of next year. And Sukkot is the ingathering of the harvest for the purpose of planting. Right? So this pasuk, right, in Parshas Mishpatim, Chaga Asif b'tzeit Shana, at the end of the year, when you gather your work from the field, it refers to both. That's Chaga Asif, right? Right? And that's all Sukkot. Sukkot is both things. It's the end of the cycle of the Shalosh Regalim, which is bringing the harvest home and enjoying it and having and eat it, and it's the beginning of. It's also part of the planting. And Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur have to do with the planting. We go back to the highest source. As we said before, we enter into a new space altogether. We just leave this world and enter into a space which is kulo ruchani, It's totally, we're sitting in B'tzilo D'imnusa, we're sitting in the shadow of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Emunah. We're completely removed ourselves from our dependency on this worldly things. Right? We don't need a roof over our head. We don't need all the things that we think that we need. We're living in a space which is a purely spiritual environment. Besod na'utz sofo b'tchilato b'tchilo b'sofo. That's the meaning of it. Is that the beginning is locked into the end, and the na'utz it's put into the end. It's stuck into the end. The beginning is locked at the end, and the end is locked into the beginning. Right? It's all one big cycle. Okay. Okay. Then he's going to talk a lot about Rosh Hashanah. Right? And he says, I'll just mention briefly, because he says Rosh Hashanah, that's why on Rosh Hashanah we have a lot of prayers for Geula, right? Because it's the holiday of recreation. And our Geula is going to be the recreation of the world. So every Rosh Hashanah, the world is created, and that's what Geula is. And so therefore, it's Dafka on Rosh Hashanah that we have many prayers that deal with the Geula. Okay. He says here, let's just read we'll read we'll skip one paragraph, we'll read the bottom paragraph. V'atam shezeh shaykh Rosh Hashanah, v'yudnei sheRosh Hashanah hu yom briyata adam. That's the day of creation of man, shehu keneged biyat HaMashiach. Because man, remember, man was created in the end of the sixth day. Mashiach is created in the sixth millennium, right? Because Mashiach has to precede the seventh millennium, right? That's right. The seventh millennium is the time when of Churban, when everything, when the world doesn't exist in the form that we know it. So Mashiach has to come. So the creation of Adam Rishon corresponds to the Mashiach. ולכן בראש השנה אנחנו מבקשים שתתגלה צורת האדם האמיתית בבריאה. Because what is the tzuras ha'adam? What is the ultimate way of the person that should be? That's the Mashiach, and we say in our Rosh Hashanah davening, I say it every Shmona Esrei, v'yomar kol asher neshama v'apo, and everyone who has a soul in his breath, in his nose, in his nostrils, should say, Hashem Elokei Yisrael Melech, God, the King of Israel, is Melech, the God of Israel is Melech, u'malchuto b'kol mashola, and his kingdom rules over everything. Right? That's what the Bria is all about. The Bria, right? We say all those psukim which talk about being. That's what the world was created for. The world was created that all human beings, Yomar Kol Asher Neshama V'Apo, everybody, everything, right? Even the Persians, even the Iranians, even Trump. Everybody's going to say, right, that Hashem Elokei Yisrael Melech, right? And in Bezrat Hashem, the miracles will continue that we see, and the miracles will continue, Bezrat Hashem, and the world will have no choice, Bezrat Hashem, but to recognize that everything, that there can't be any other explanation other than the fact that God is the God of Israel, and He is the King, and He rules over everything. And that's ultimately what we're hoping for, we're praying for, that the war that we're in, where we see so many miracles, should lead, right, the humankind to that recognition. First of all, it should lead us to that recognition, right? Because we could use a little bit the shot in the arm for that as well, right? But we're a little bit closer than some of the others, and the purpose of it is to get that recognition that Hashem, right, is Melech al Kol Yomer Kol Asher Hashem Apo, and that's the Mashiach, and that's the recreation of the world, which we pray for, especially on Rosh Hashanah, which is the time of the creation of Adam, which is the time of the creation of Mashiach. And he says, Gam Asod Shel Shofar Shaykh Lezeh, right? And this is what shofar is all about. Ki yesh lo koach legalot et omer tzurat Adam, because shofar can reveal the depth of what a human being is suras ha'adam, besod vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim, because as we know, that the shofar is a recreation of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is blowing his breath into Adam, So the breath that we blow into the shofar is a reenactment of that original creation of Adam Arishon, right? And we experience that rebirth. And that's why when Mashiach comes, right, it's going to come with a shofar, right? Right? As we say in the Psukim, right? There'll be a shofar gadol. We say that in our davening every day. Gabi shofar gadol, right? V'chein matan Torah nitgale tzurat adam ba'olam yedei tkiyat shofar, and we know that shofar was one of the main features of Kodesh Baruch Hu's revelation on Har Sinai, right? Ki hakol inyanecha. Okay, now so let's try to finish up in a few minutes here. Let's try to finish up the chapter as best we can. Okay, so let's ובעניין זה יש ידיעה חשובה שנוגעת לענייננו הנמצאת בתוך תשובס של רב הייגון. Okay, so he's going to tell us something about a tshuva of Rav Haigon. Now, Rav Haigon lived, right, when Rav Haigon lived in the 11th century, right, something like that, right? If I'm not mistaken, right, in the time, the end of the Tkufas of Gaonim, right? You can look it up on your GPS, right, whatever you got there, right? But if you want, you can give us exact dates. But Haigon lived at the end of the Tkufas of Gaonim, right? And he writes a tshuva like this. התשובה עוסקת בשאלה כמה פעמים צריך לומר ובכן בתפילות ראש השנה. We say, remember, we say ובכן תן פחתך in the third bracha of Shemona Esrei. You say Ata Kodesh V'Kadosh, and then we have three ובכן. So ובכן תן chapachta, ובכן תן kavod, ובכן I forgot what the third one is, right? Right. So Hari Sover שצריך לומר דלת פעמים ובכן. Right. The Ari in his Shar Kavanas. Avor Rav Haigon Sover shall peace sod, according to the Kabbalah, Ein Lomer B'chein Yosem Megillah, we should only say 3 times. V'zeh no say b'fnei atzmo. Okay, that's something we're not going to talk about right now. Ulam. B'toch hadvarim sham, Rav Haigon Omer. There's a historical information here, which Rav Moshe wants to focus on. She'amora Rav, it was Rav, hu zeh shechiber et tefilot Rosh Hashanah. Rav is the one who was the author of the Tfilos of Rosh Hashanah. Umekoro milashon haGemara shelanu, and it says in the Gemara, shemusav shel Rosh Hashanah nikra tkiata de Rav. Right? It's called the Tkiyos of Rav, of the yeshiva of Rav, meaning that so the Gemara attributes the Musaf, which is called the Tkiyos. This time when we blow the shofar, the ikar blowing of the shofar is during the Musaf Shemona Esrei. And that's called, the tefillos are called the tefillos of Rav. Right? Ubepashas etzorchim. Moshe says that it's a difficulty. The Gemara said that all the tefillos that we have, the brachos, the avdolos, the kiddushes that we have, these are all were created by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. The Anshe Knesset HaGedolah were before the Tanoim, before the Amoraim, right, at the beginning of the second temple period. So he asks the question, so why didn't they make tefillos Rosh Hashanah? They had to wait till Rav. Right? Rav lived at least 500-600 years later. This is something which is v'lo matzino af echad mefarish. Al piyah mevuar kan nirah lefarish. Rabbi says, I got pshat. שכיוון שהמיוחד בתפילות ראש השנה הוא שהן מכוונות לביאס הגואל, what's special about Rosh Hashanah is that they're tefillos for the coming of the Redeemer, as he says, he quotes in the footnotes, וכן תן פחתך על כל מעשיך, וכל הרישה כולה כאושן תכלה, כי סביב ממשל הדורן, right? It's all the tefillos that were put into the Rosh Hashanah davening are connected Mashiach. The kiva, so he listened to Rav Moshe's perush of this inyan. It wasn't before the beginning of the 5th millennium, Mashiach couldn't come, right? Except for the exceptional things that we said, right? But the Ram says, right? Okay. Lechein. This contradicts what we read before, but we'll leave that right now. Lechein. Anshe Knesset Gedolah lo yachlu letaken et ota tefillah. The Moshe Mechadish, the Anshe Knesset Gedolah were not shaykh to that tefillah because they were living in the tkufa of Torah. Because when was the transition from the tkufa of Torah to the tkufa of Mashiach? That was in the year 240, right? And when did Rav live? Baruch in that time, right? That was Rav. Rav, he says, he quotes here from the Svarim that Rav died in the year 243, right? According to certain sources. Again, a lot of this history is, not accurate to the minute, to the day, but Baruch, right? We know that Rav came back to, we know the Rav's history. Rav was originally from Bavel. He was in Eretz Yisrael, and he learned under Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and so Rav is that bridge between the period of the Tanoim and the period of Amoraim. The Gemara says Rav Tana hu upolig. Rav was a Tana, and he argues. He could argue with a Tana, right? He had the status, even though he was an Amora, but he had the status of a Tana in certain things. So the Anshe Knesset Gdola, right? They were living in a period of history that wasn't shaykh to Mashiach. V'rak Rav sheniftar bedalid alofim dalid, according to his, right, which would be the year 244. Right? If the year 240 is dalid alofim, right? So the year 244, who zeh sheyochel letaken tefillah agula, right? And Rabbi Moshe says, we don't know what their tefillos were in the Bayesheni. Whatever, but this is his. Nimsa. Sherav haya nekudat hama'avar bein trei alofim Torah letrei alofim Yemos HaMashiach. Rav was the transition point between these two eras of epochs of the world. Ve'etzlo nigmar HaMishnah ve'etchil HaGemara. The Mishnah is considered Torah. That's the Torah. That was the revealed Torah. That was the Torah that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, and the fundamental Torah Shapell, right? V'itchil Gemara, and that's what, and that's when the Gemara started, which was, as we know, what Gemara is. It's the analysis of the Mishnah. It's taking the Mishnah as the base, and the Mishnah can't be contradicted. The Mishnah is etzem Torah. And therefore, we have to deal with the Mishnah. We have to learn the Mishnah. We have to try the Mishnah, but we can't argue with the Mishnah because the Mishnah is the Etzem Torah itself, Etzem Torah Shapell, right? Rav Tanu Polig, right? Ubechama Mekomos the Gemara Omeres Olav Dover Zeh Rabbeinu Agadol Omro Hamokom Yeh Be'Ozro, right? This is right. It says Rabbeinu Agadol. Rav was called Rabbeinu Agadol. May Hashem help him. It says Rabbi Nikra Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rav Nikra Rabbeinu HaGadol. Kishem sheRebbi hu haRebbe shel HaMishnah, kach Rav hu haRebbe shel HaGemara. V'achiluk shebein Rebbe l'Rav ze mipat ha'evdel shemein Chachmei Eretz Yisrael Chachmei Bavel. The Rav haya Rosh Yeshiva b'Sura shebeBavel. This is what we know, that Rav came to Bavel and he founded actually the yeshiva in Sura because he didn't want to step on anybody's toes. He was such an onav that even though he was certainly the gadol of the gadol ador in Babel when he came back, but he founded his own yeshiva. Umitoch divrei Rav Haigon nira sherav sider gam es hatotzafot shel birchas kedushas Hashem v'chein yiskarchem ptainkem v'achtocha v'chein ten kovod shekol alecha gola atida. Okay. So that's the basic idea here. I'll just finish up because we're going to finish the chapter. Okay, just turn the page. No, so let's read at the bottom there. We have a few minutes left. Umitoch divrei Rav Haigon, Nira, the bottom of the last paragraph. Sherav sira gam atosafot shel birchas kedushas Hashem u'lerein yiskara v'chein tein pachto v'chein tein tovot she'akol holech al hagula atida. Everything is on a v'zeh tefillah miyuchedet lehavir et shlitat malchus romi min ha'olam. Which malchus is there a prayer to? It's malchus romi. Shehi nikreit memshelet zadon. Kumoshe omrim b'tfilah ki tavir memshelet zadon min ha'aretz. Okay. So, and that tefillah was something which was created by in the time of Rav, because the Romans, the Greeks, were still that was the time when they were still the powers of the Romans continued to to rule in Eretz Yisrael for centuries after the destruction until the Arabs came, right? Until the Arabs came and conquered it from them in the 7th century, something like that. But for centuries, the Romans were the main power there. In other words, they never would have called the Persian Empire Malchus Zada because they were good to the Jews. They helped build the Beis Hamikdash. The Ikar Shlitat Malchut Azoti be'elav hachamishi, the Malchus of Rome is in the 5th millennium. She Keneged Sfiras Hod, V'Sod Kol Yom Dova. Okay, that's more Kabbalistic than I can handle right now. Yadua. V'Lachein Davka B'Tchilat Ha'elav Hachamishi, Shayach Sheyeh Tikun Shel Melech HaMashiach, right? Shetzarich Lachul B'Davka LaMalchut HaRevi'ah. So the Malchus HaRevi'ah was Rome, and the Tikun of Melech HaMashiach comes at the beginning of the 5th millennium, which was Rav's Tfilas. We also daven, right, from the Anshek Nesek Dola, we daven for Yerushalayim and Malchus Beis David. That's not dafka for the Gula. That was something, even when there was a Beis HaMikdash, it wasn't because we needed a Gula. We were living in our own land with a Beis HaMikdash, with our own king, and we still had these tefillas. ונוסח ה-18 שבדנו עם כל סדר הברכות שמכוון לגאולה עתידה נתקן על ידי שמעון הפיקולי כמבואר בגמרא וזה יהיה אחר החורבן. That's the Seder of our Shemona Esrei came later. Right? Okay, so we'll stop here. Okay, so that's the basic idea that the Malchus, the Gamma, we'll read the last paragraph. Gamma Psukim Shel Malchus Zichronos Shofros Lo Nitchu Mechila Davka B'Seder Shel Fanenu. Right, the Psukim of Malchus Zichronos Shofros were not Nitkanu according to the Seder that we have. El Ikar Dover Hu La'azkir Psukim Sheish B'En Me'inyan HaMalchus Zichronos Shofros. The Rav Hu Shetiken Ev Psukim Shelanu. Rav is the one who. Right? When we have the 10 psukim that we say from Malchus and Shofros, that all came from Rav. Right? ולכן הסדר של כל הפסוקים של הנביאים בכל גמל הברכות מכוונים על גילוי החיבה והקרבה הגדולה שתהיה בגאולה עתידה. And that's why all of the psukim from the Nevi'im in all 3 brachos are there to speak about the great love and kirva, right, and closeness that will be with the Gula Hasidah, sheniske b'mehera b'yameinu. Okay, and that's the bottom, and then at the bottom here in footnote 10 Zayin, he goes through all the psukim of the Malchus, Zichronos, and Shofros from the Nevi'im. Okay, Rabbi said we'll stop here, so we should be zeicha, right? We're seeing, as I say,
Amen.
He said, "Kimei zeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim ha'enon niflos." It says that the Gula, right, Asida is going to be bigger miracles than we were zocha to in Mitzrayim, and this today we can appreciate. Everybody understands this. It's not something that I'm being mechadish, but there's we say v'hisha amda, right? Shelo echa bilvad amar aleinu lecha loseinu. So we didn't even realize the depth of the amar aleinu lecha loseinu that we experienced in this generation. We didn't know how much this guy, these Khomeinis and all these guys were really, really seriously plotting the destruction of Eretz Yisrael, of the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, planning to kill all of us. Right? They really had a very serious and evidently, and al pi derech hateva, it was a plan that could have worked. Chas v'sholem, but it was an Omar Aleinu Lecha Loseinu. We sing it, kind of, hyperbole. Yeah, they're always out to get us. We experienced that with Hitler, of course. That was for sure. But okay, but we got used to. I remember Moshe saying we got used to, 60, 70 years where history quieted down and Jews were not as persecuted and as pursued in most of the world right, as they were in earlier times, and even in Russia, things. The communism came to an end, and the persecution of the Jews ended. So we got used to thinking, Beseder, those are all historical things, and we're okay. From now on, we'll be okay. But then, Baruch Hu reveals to us that Moshe said to us that the relative peace, quiet that the Jews had for 60 years after the Holocaust, it was only a blip in the history of the world. That wasn't the emes Metzias. The emes Metzias is that Choldor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chal. But as we were zocha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyodam, we should be zocha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyodam, and be zocha to see the Geula Shlema b'meira b'yameinu. And Mirza Hashem, we will meet on this first Sunday of Iyar. Okay. Pesach ends Wednesday, Thursday in Chutz La'aretz, so not the following Sunday, not the Sunday right after Pesach, but the Sunday following that. It'll be the Beis, if I'm not mistaken, Beis Iyar, right? Mirza Hashem. And again, as I mentioned the other day, I would like to do the chapters later in the book about the ultimate fight between Edom and Paras, and who's going to be who's going to win the big drag out fight, the showdown between them, and who will be ones who will be handing over the keys to Melech HaMashiach, b'mheira b'yameinu. As I said last week, I hope by the time we get there in a month, will be history and not prophecy.
Amen. Amen.
Okay, kol tuv, chag kasher v'samech to everybody, and thank you for coming and listening, and Bezrat Hashem will be together again. Kol tuv, be well.